Jaya Radha Gopinath Radha Gopinath Shri Radhe. Jaya Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai Gauranitai Jaya Gauranitai. Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Jagannatha Jaya Baladeva Jaya Subhadra. Jaya Jaya Prabhupada 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 Jaya Jaya Prabhupada. Jaya Jaya Gurudev 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 Jaya Jaya Gurudev. Nitai Gop Premanandi. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Abhayachan Arvinda Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. Jai Om Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Stotra Shri Srimad Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki. Ananta Kori Vaishnav Vrind Ki. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki. प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवसादि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड की गोवर्धन की मथुरा धाम की वृंदावन धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की गंगा माई की यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी की श्री प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेशनल बुक डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की श्री प्रभुपाद ट्रांसलेशनल प्रसारण डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन की निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to the assembled devotees, Hare Krishna. All glories to Shri Guru and Shri Guru. Hare Krishna. Welcome everyone to this morning's Srimad Bhagavatam class. We are reading from 3rd canto, chapter 22, verse number 19. That's on the board. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Ato bhajisya samayena sadhavim yavat tejo bibrayadatmano me ato dharman paramahamsaya mukhyan shukla proktan bahumanye vihimshran ato bhajisya samayena sadhavim yavat tejo bibrayadatmano me ato dharmam paramahamsaya mukhya sukla proktam bahumanya vihimshran ato bhajisya samayena sadve yavat tejo bibrayadatmano me ato dharmam paramahamsaya mukhya sukla proktan bahumanya vihimshran Word for word translation. Ata, therefore, bhajisye, I shall accept. Samayena, on the conditions. Sadvim, the chaste girl. Yavat, until. Tejaha, semen. Bibrayat, may bear. Atmana, from my body. Me, my. Ataha, thereafter. Dharman, the duties. Paramahamsaya Mukhya, of the best of the Paramahamsas. Sukla Proktan, spoken by Lord Vishnu. Bahu, much. Manye, I shall consider. Ahim, avihimshra, free from envy. Translation and purport by Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki. Therefore, I shall accept this chaste girl as my wife, on the condition that after she bears semen from my body, I shall accept the life of devotional service accepted by the most perfect human beings. That process will be described by Lord Vishnu. It is free from envy. Purport. Kardama Muni expressed a desire for a very beautiful wife to Emperor Swayambhuva and accepted the emperor's daughter for marriage. Kardama Muni was in the hermitage practicing complete celibacy as a brahmachari, and although he had the desire to marry, he did not want to be a householder for the whole span of his life, because he was conversant with the Vedic principles of human life. According to Vedic principles, the first part of life should be utilized in brahmacharya for the development of character and spiritual qualities. In the next part of life, one may accept a wife and beget children, but one should not beget children like cats and dogs. Kardama Muni desired to beget a child who would be a ray of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should beget a child who can perform the duties of Vishnu. Otherwise, there is no need to produce children. There are two kinds of children born of good fathers. One is educated in Krishna consciousness so that he can be delivered from the clutches of Maya in that very life. And the other is a ray of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and teaches the world the ultimate goal of life. As will be described in later chapters, Kardama Muni begot such a child, Kapila, the incarnation of the Personality of Godhead who enunciated the philosophy of Sankhya. Great householders pray to God to send his representatives so that there may be an auspicious movement in human society. This is one reason to beget a child. Another reason is that a highly enlightened parent can train a child in Krishna consciousness so that the child will not have to come back again to this miserable world. Parents should see to it that the child born of them does not enter the womb of a mother again. Unless one can train a child for liberation in their life, there is no need to marry or produce children. If human society produces children like cats and dogs for the disturbance of social order, then the world becomes hellish, as it has in this age of Kali. In this age of Kali, in this age, neither parents nor their children are trained. Both are animalistic and simply eat, sleep, mate, defend, and gratify their senses. This disorder in social life cannot bring peace to human society. Kardama Muni explained beforehand that he would not associate with the girl Devahuti for the whole duration of his life. He would simply associate with her until she had a child. In other words, sex life should be utilized only to produce a nice child, not for any other purpose. Human life is especially meant for complete devotion to the service of the Lord. That is the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya. After fulfilling his responsibility to produce a nice child, one should take sannyas and engage in the perfectional Paramahamsa stage. Paramahamsa refers to the most highly elevated perfectional stage of life. There are 4 stages within sannyas life, and Paramahamsa is the highest order. The Srimad Bhagavatam is called the Paramahamsa Samhita, the treatise for the highest class of human beings. The Paramahamsa is free from envy. In other stages, even in the householder stage of life, there is competition and envy. But Since the activities of the human being in the Paramahamsa stage are completely engaged in Krishna consciousness or devotional service, there is no scope for envy. In the same order as Kardama Muni, about 100 years ago, Thakur Bhakti Vinod also wanted to beget a child who could preach the philosophy and teaching Lord Chaitanya to the fullest extent. By his prayers to the Lord, he had as his child Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, who at the present moment is preaching the philosophy of Lord Chaitanya throughout the entire world through his bona fide disciples. Jai! Om Jnanatimirandhasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavam Cha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Tajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakanvitam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Shute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpa Tirubhascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaivacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Thank you everyone for this morning's Bhagavatam classes that are here and that are attending over Mayapur TV. So I'll repeat the translation again. Therefore, so it's 322.19. Therefore I shall accept this chaste girl as my wife on the condition that after she bears semen from my body, I shall accept the life of devotional service accepted by the most perfect human beings. That process was described by Lord Vishnu. It is free from envy. So, setting the context here and what's happened, let's go back to the previous chapter, 321.15. And in that verse, I'll flip over. Kardama Muni has been requested by Lord Brahma to produce progeny that will fill up the universe, or obviously progeny that will uplift human society, that will actually give human society a chance to go back home, back to Godhead. So for that purpose, Kardama Muni is practicing austerities, and as a result of his austerities and his meditation, the Lord appears and gives him audience. And as soon as the Lord gives them audience, Kardama Muni he condemns those materialistic persons who actually just pray to the Lord for material desires. And then after that, in chapter 21, verse number 15, what does Kardama Muni ask the Lord for? Therefore, desiring to marry a girl of like disposition who may prove to be a veritable cow of plenty in my married life, to satisfy my lustful desire, I too have sought the shelter of your lotus feet, which are the source of everything, for you are like a desire tree. So that's Kardama Muni's desire. And the Lord responds to him in verse number 28. That princess, a holy sage, will be just the type you have been thinking of in your heart for all these long years. She'll soon be yours and will serve you to your heart's content. And just the verse that we read today preceding those two other verses, we see, in one sense, Kardama Muni, obviously he's grateful, and he's expressing, first he starts off this chapter by, or towards the end of the last chapter, he's glorifying Swayambhuva Manu for his being such a veritable king and to ruling the citizens and ruling this planet in such a way that's befitting his duty as a Kshatriya. And then he later on, once he's finished glorifying Swayambhuva Manu, then basically glorifies Kardama Muni, and then as the conversation proceeds further, Swayambhuva Manu hands or is making a proposal for his daughter, and then what we just saw in the last two verses, how Swayambhuva Manu is so grateful to for receiving Devahuti's hand in marriage. Now as we're reading through this, we can see, and then he drops this condition that as soon as there's progeny, as soon as she bears semen from my body, I shall take up the life of the Paramahamsas. So as I was reading this, now if you're especially following the last two verses, and if you're able to see through the mind of Kardama Muni, one may think, oh, he's being grateful, but there's obviously some excitement on his part. That, oh, okay, this was my desire, and the Lord has now fulfilled my desire. But then right away he comes, but this is the condition. So Kardama Muni is actually showing us that he is actually not, when I read this verse, what came to my mind was Kardama Muni is not a Sakama devotee. He's not a mixed devotee. A lot of times in our own Krishna consciousness, especially when I speak for myself, yes, I'm a practicing sadhaka. At times my intentions are to please the Lord, but there's always that element of me in it. Okay, what's in it for me? And as I was reading this, I was drawn to the last verse of the 15th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, in which Srila Prabhupada writes such a beautiful purport, and actually each time I read it, it fills me up with so much of, I won't say realization, but it obviously tells me the true nature of who I am. And in that purport, Srila Prabhupada writes, when one is performing devotional service in the association of pure devotees in full Krishna consciousness, there are certain things which require to be vanquished altogether. The most important thing one has to surmount is weakness of the heart. The first fall down is caused by the desire to lord it over material nature. Thus one gives up the transcendental loving service of the Supreme Lord. The second weakness of the heart is that as one increases the propensity to lord it over material nature, he becomes attached to matter and the possession of matter. The problems of material existence are due to these weaknesses of the heart. So, this is the nature of a Sakama devotee. In the Krishna book, also in the Bhagavatam, in the 10th canto, there's the story of Lord Indra, wherein, and this pastime happens much after the Govardhan hill pastime, where Krishna, Indra's mother, Aditi, her earrings have been stolen by Bhaumasura or Narakasura, and Krishna, he basically kills Bhaumasura and he rescues the earrings from, from the vicinity that those earrings were placed, and then he goes on a trip to the heavenly planets with Satyabhama. And as he goes to the heavenly planets, as he's taking the tour, Satyabhama, because previously Narada Muni had gifted the Parijata flower to Rukmini, and as a result of that, Satyabhama also desires to have the Parijata flower, and Krishna says, why not just one flower? Why don't you just come with me and we'll take the whole, because the Parijata flower is actually found in the heavenly planets, so why don't you come along with me and you can actually take the whole tree. So when Krishna and Satyabhama actually go to the heavenly planets and they return the earrings to Aditi. Both Aditi and Lord Indra are very grateful. Prabhupada writes in the Krishna book, Lord Indra is just, paying his obeisances and is just so grateful, glorifying Krishna. And what happens the very next moment? Satyabhama takes the parija that she uproots the whole tree and they're walking away with it. And Indra says, hey, wait a minute. What are you doing? And Krishna and the demigods and Indra basically, they put up opposition to the Lord and Krishna defeats them. And Prabhupada writes he writes it so beautifully in that chapter. That's the nature of a mixed devotee or a sakama devotee. That they have some self-interest. So up until the point that Krishna returns the earrings to Satyabhama, to Aditi, Indra is all happy. His interest has now been served. But at the very moment, Satyabhama takes the tree, he feels, something has happened. So he doesn't see that actually that same Lord who actually brought this earrings for my mother is now, as a token of gratitude, to offer the tree, he basically is putting up some opposition. So a lot of times, even in our own lives, we may pray to the Lord for whatever it may be, the spiritual material, whatever desires we have, whatever projects or whatever initiatives or whatever is going through our life. And the Lord, being all merciful and compassionate, will reciprocate with us. The test is what happens when our desires are fulfilled. Srila Prabhupada will always say that Krishna first tested me by taking away everything from me, and then he tested me by giving me back everything manifold. There's a story that what's that devotee in Chowpatty? Not Nair, the other one who later on became a disciple of Radha Vinod Swami, an industrialist who left his body a few years ago. No. He's a disciple of Radha Vinod Swami later on. N starts with an N to Nar something. Anyway. Yeah, Srinathji Prabhu. So Srinathji Prabhu said that when he was, after Prabhupada left, he felt such separation that he was interviewing many people that actually had known of Prabhupada before he even went to the West. And he said that he had interviewed so many people, and one person said that, I had seen Swamiji before he left to the West, he had nothing. And I saw Swamiji after he came back from America with practically thousands of disciples, all sorts of opulence that one can think of, but he was the same person. So in our own lives, the test would come, when Krishna gives us whatever we desire, are we still remaining fixed to the service of Sri Radha Gopinath and our Lordships and Srila Prabhupada and to our spiritual master's instruction? And a lot of times it may happen, some service that we take up, or whatever, like I said, initiatives or whatever projects that we may have that we are actually, a part of, or we're leading, or Krishna, it may just happen to be that there may come a time that service may be taken away from us, just for whatever reasons it may be. It may not just be for, that someone is just trying to take away that service, but due to some arrangement, that service is taken away. And at that time, if we attach to the fame and recognition or whatever that's coming with that service, or whatever is coming, or whatever that we actually receive from that endeavor, if we attach to that, then obviously there'll be some resistance on our part to give away. But we should see it that what is it? At any point in time, we should see what is Krishna arranging for our purification, and that's what Srila Prabhupada writes in this 15th chapter, is that the weakness of our, to surmount this weakness of heart, which in Sanskrit known as Hridaya Daurbalyam. We have to understand what is it that we're holding on to that's stopping us, or that's basically serving as an obstruction between us and Radha Gopinath. Because ultimately, everything that we do should be for Radha Gopinath's pleasure and the pleasure of the Vaishnavas. But somehow or the other, there are things that are in our heart that, that basically get fed. So those weeds that are, that are also getting fed. So how do we identify what's there for us to be, uprooted? So we see that there's a twist in the story. Up until this point, just the verse prior to this, Kadama Muni is very jubilant. You can see in his expression and his words that he's actually expressing his gratitude and jubilation. But now he's saying, just on this one condition, that the moment she bears a child, I will actually be taking up the process of full devotional service. So in our own lives, and in our own lives, we should. Yesterday I was listening to a lecture by Doni Tamal Krishna Maharaj, and he was saying, sacrifice is the price we pay for advancement in Krishna consciousness. And we see that even in the Bhagavad Gita, this point being repeatedly emphasized over and over and over again, where Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, one that doesn't participate in the cycle of sacrifice, there's no happiness either here or there. So we have to somehow or the other understand we'll have to sacrifice either way. We'll either sacrifice for the pleasure of our own senses, it may be for a family, for extended family, whatever it is, but how is it that I can mold my life now in such a way that sacrifice, the fruits of the sacrifice can be offered to Radha Gopinath. So each of us has to actually individually analyze our situation and see the question that was asked to Maharaj, Tamal Krishna Maharaj, was, why don't I have attachment for the holy name? And Maharaj just says, because you're not engaging in devotional service enough. It was as simple as that. He said, Maharaj was going back and forth. He said, you're arguing with me on the material platform, but I'm giving you a solution on the spiritual platform. You have to understand that if I'm not, he's like, the mandate's quite simple enough that if one is actually in the householder life, one should actually dedicate 50% of the fruits of his labor to the deities and the Vaishnavas, if not 50% of your earnings, then 50% of your time. And he said, I don't see anywhere in the Shastra where it says, if I'm just serving my family, then that's equivalent to serving Krishna. He said that nowhere in the Shastra did you find that. So we have to sacrifice. There'll be, like a lot of you here are sacrificing your time, sacrificing your youth, sacrificing your years. A lot of Matajis here that I see are giving away so much of their time just for the pleasure of the Lord. And so on and so forth. Each of us, we have to take up some sacrifice for the pleasure of Radha Gopinath, of Srila Prabhupada. And that eventually will take us closer to the lotus feet of Radha Gopinath. So again, like I said, this is something for each of us to really meditate upon. How is it that if you're not having any taste for the holy name, if you don't have any taste for service, why is it so? Now, obviously, here you see towards the end of the purport, Srila Prabhupada is actually glorifying Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur and offering all of his credit to Srila Bhaktivedanta Saraswati Thakur. And that's important. And that's because if you read the last part of the translation, it is free from envy. Krishna writes in the Bhagavad Gita, or Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita in many places, but he says to Arjuna in the 9th chapter, verse number 1, I'm explaining to you the secret because you're free from envy. So it's envy that actually serves as an obstruction in our heart. And that, like I said, is something that is due to the weakness of our heart. As long as we are seeing, and I may say, I'm not envious of Krishna, but if I see someone else who's actually performing their services in such a way that Krishna is so pleased with it, and if I don't appreciate it, then that means that there is envy in my heart. And it's not only us, it also actually happens among higher beings in this universe. Once, just I think 2 days ago, I was listening to a class by His Holiness Guru Prasad Swami in Vrindavan, and the verses that they're actually reading out that they're actually speaking in Vrindavan is the lifting of the Govardhan hill. So in that, he said a story in which in Washington, some devotees who would go out on Sankirtan every day it was raining so much that they couldn't go out, quite similar to what we had in Sydney, leading up to now. It rains, and when it's raining, we can't really, go out and book distribution. Obviously, those that go out daily, they'll understand what it is, because obviously we don't want the books to get wet. So day after day after day, it would just rain, and devotees were just getting so frustrated that they went up to Srila Prabhupada, and they told Srila Prabhupada, we want to go out on books every day, but it's just been raining. And Prabhupada says, oh, looks like Indra is sending rains because he's insecure. Because if you're distributing books, if you advance so much, you're probably going to take up his position. So, because there's this envy, that someone else takes up my position. And it also happens in our own services as well. If a service that we are doing, we see someone else that's performing the service nicely with an opportunity, to grow in their service, rather than encouraging that person to do their service, we'll rather try to, put them down. My Guru Maharaj always says that picture yourself on a ladder, and if you're on a ladder, there's someone below you. If due to whatever reason, if you push that other person down, guess what happens? You also go down. But if you push someone up, then you also go up. So that's how it is. This envy, it's somehow or the other, it's there in our heart because we're envious of Krishna. Krishna clearly says in the Bhagavad Gita chapter 5, Bhoktaram Yagyatapasam Sarva Loka Maheshwaram. I am the beneficiary and enjoyer of all sacrifices. So it's Krishna who's the prime, who's actually meant to enjoy, and we are meant to be instruments to facilitate that enjoyment. But rather, when we see ourselves in that position, then that's when we understand that we still are in this material existence. So envy has been described. There's so much of it described in the Bhagavatam, and it comes because, again, we don't want to see anyone else there other than ourselves, even though, we'll be, and that's the nature, because we are mixed, our desires are mixed, so we don't really see, we can't really understand what it is to be situated on that pure devotional service platform. Once my Guru Maharaj asked His Grace Pradyumna Prabhu, whom Srila Prabhupada gave him the title of Panditji because he helped translate and he was a Sanskrit scholar. So Maharaj asked him that if everything in the material world is a reflection, there's a counterpart for it in the spiritual world, then there is pride in the material world. I understand that I'm inflicted by pride. That means pride must also exist in the spiritual world. And Pradyumna Prabhu gave a very interesting answer. He said, yes, everything in the material world that we see has a counterpart in its purest form in the spiritual world. And he said that in the spiritual world, pride does exist. In the material world, pride is for me to be the boss of everything, for me to be the master of all I control. In the spiritual world, the pride is that I'm the servant of the servant of the servant. So in the material world, there's competition, as here we see Srila Prabhupada writing this purport. In other stages, even in the household of life, there's competition and envy. So in the material world, there's competition to be number one. In the spiritual world, there's competition to be the last. So if you see clearly, everyone there is just trying to encourage one another. Even the gopis, they're trying to see, in fact, in the conversation between Ramananda Roy and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, you see towards the end that when the gopis are basically, when they're trying to decorate, or they're trying to bring Radharani closer to Krishna, but Radharani is actually wanting the gopis to be closer to Krishna. So there's always this competition. So similarly, in the spiritual world, the pride is of having as many masters as we can, because we see everyone as a master and we want to serve everyone, because that brings us closer to the divine couple. So somehow or the other, we should understand that, after reading this purport, at least when I read it, I understood, or there was this realization that I'm inflicted by this disease, and somehow or the other, my spiritual master, the Vaishnava, Srila Prabhupada, and Ashish Radha Gopinath are so merciful that they're pointing out that one, if I'm not at that pure devotion service platform, that means this is what I'm inflicted with, and this is where I need to work up towards. So there's so much about envy. Like I said, pages of the Bhagavatam are filled with stories and instructions. We see in the pastime of Daksha and Lord Shiva, where Daksha felt offended by Shiva, but it was actually that, a lot of time when we see something that happens in our lives, we just see, the tip of the iceberg. We don't actually see what's actually brewing underneath it that has actually caused the whole situation. So even though Daksha felt offended, Lord Shiva was in his own right to not offer obeisances, but at the same time, Daksha felt that envy because Shiva is considered to be, more exalted spiritually, and he's offered all respects, even though externally it may not seem like it, but due to his envy, he offended such a great personality, and the result of it was that he got a goat's head. So there is so much that we learn from that pastime. Similarly, in the same canto, in Canto 4, we see how Indra, when he's seeing that King Prithu is actually performing horse sacrifices, he tries to come in and stop him at his 100th horse sacrifice. And at that very moment, there's so much that happens. Each time Indra is walking away with the horse, then King Prithu Maharaj's son goes and brings the horse back, and finally it comes to the point where Lord Brahma has to come and tell Prithu Maharaj, be happy with your 99 horse sacrifices, and this Indra is just something. And then again, we go to the 10th canto, we see Kaliya. Interesting enough, when I was hearing a class by a Mataji in the US, I just can't remember I think Radha Devidasi, she was saying, Kaliya, of all the demons in Vrindavan, Krishna never killed Kaliya. He just, he chastised him, but if you see even in the title of the chapter, Krishna chastises the Kaliya serpent. Kali is actually filled with that, that toxic disease of envy, and later on, the wives of Kali actually pray to Krishna that please deliver him, and as a result of their prayers, Krishna does. So again, there is so much here, especially in this purport. Srila Prabhupada makes some very pertinent points that are actually applicable to us in our day-to-day spiritual practice, and also it gives us an idea what our goals should be. So, yeah, like I said, now there's been a twist in the story. Up until now, it was all leading up to Kardama Muni getting, being approached by Swayambhuva Manu and being given the hand of Devahuti, but now he's accepted it, but on this one condition. So there'll be so much more that will happen in this following chapter, and we'll see later on too. And once they're married, all the mystic powers of Kadama Muni that'll come into play in the following chapters. So, yeah, I'd like to stop here if anyone has any question or comment, reflection. Yes, Mother Shri Krishna. Okay. Can you just repeat that last bit in the purports? I didn't hear that again.
Sorry, so does it say in the purpose that this Prabhupada specifically mentions that Kadama Muni is a Sakamadi? Because I'm thinking, previously reading it, for example, I was thinking that Kadama Muni, maybe in the following verses, that when Kadama Muni exchanged glances with Devahuti, he was actually meditating on Vishnu. And also previously, Kadama Muni, I mean, he always wanted to be in the Brahmacharya.
Yeah.
But then again, he had a desire to beget children. He meditated, Then again, he also gave words to Swami Manu that once he begat the child, he had for the hills, right? So, I mean, what if he gets a female child? So
Yeah.
it's the scriptures. But anyhow, so it's just after the kids, like again, you want to become
Paramahamsa. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So how do you?
Yeah. So in this purport itself, when the preceding purport is obviously Prabhupada doesn't, there's no mention of Kardama Muni being on that Sakama. I mean, like I said, I mentioned it just because just to make a point that this is how fixed Kardama Muni is. If you see that in the previous chapter, there's a question there that even though Kardama Muni has audience with the Lord, and there's a proper writes in the purport that if you see that he's first condemning materialistic mindset, but then at the same time he's still asking for it. So Prabhupada, in the purport says, why didn't one ask for liberation? So Prabhupada writes in that one, even though he had the desire, but he actually he asked it to the Lord himself, not asking to someone else. So even though this is a verse in the Bhagavatam, I think second canto, akama sarva kama moksha kama tardis, whatever desire we may have, we approach the Lord. Now, sakama is mostly to understand, at least for myself, where am I at? If I were to been offered such a benediction, if you see Kadama Muni is still fixed, there's no I don't want to take away from the verse that will be spoken tomorrow, but he actually falls silent and he's actually meditating on the Lord, and so there's no deviation from his duty. Once Tamakrishna Maharaj was approached by some person saying that my Gurudev is so transcendental, he's so detached from money that even if someone offers him money, he just says, please don't even show me these notes. And Tamakrishna Maharaj said, my spiritual master is so expert, you give him money, he'll ask for more money, and the very next minute he's going to spend it all for Krishna's pleasure. So it's that consciousness that Kadama Muni has here, that even though he's in the previous two verses, even though he knows the great qualities of Devahuti, how beautiful she is, how qualified she is, at the same time he knows what his purpose is. So that's
So that's what I was thinking as well with Muni's status, with his consciousness, because people can deviate after going into the Grasta ashram,
yeah.
all
No. You never see that happening. And in fact, what happens with the union between him and Devahuti? It's the Lord comes in. In fact, Jiva Goswami writes that even though we see, it may seem very tragic, him saying this, look, I'll be leaving soon. From a mundane platform, that may seem very tragic, but actually on the transcendental platform, Jiva Goswami writes that one shouldn't take the affection to be mundane. It's actually, what's coming forth is the Lord. The Lord himself is going to appear as Kapila Dev. Thank you. Yeah.
the other thing, I was just thinking, so when Krishna created the new Dwarka, right?
Yeah.
So everybody gave presents, and then I remember like someone gave Parijata tree as well. So then I was thinking, what is the need for Rukmani or
Satyabhama.
Satyabhama later? I mean, Satyabhama wrote to Pakistan, but then again, why does he need to make another set of people? Did he draw him out or something?
Actually, in the Krishna book, Prabhupada writes is that it's just that Rukmini was gifted a flower, just a flower by Narada Muni, and it just Krishna just to keep peace in the house said, okay, Satyabhama, I'll also you'll come with me and we'll take we'll get it from the heavenly planet. So yeah, I mean it's. And obviously, there were many reasons why Krishna took Satyabhama. To the heavenly planet, but prior to that, he took them to kill Bhaumasura. There's a lot of intricacy in that pastime too. Yeah, we want more. Thank you. Anything else? Hare ग्रंथ श्रीमद् भागवतम की, श्रील प्रभुपाद की, निताय गौर प्रेमानंदी, गो भक्तवृंद की।